Morning guys, I'm Dave Canterbury with the Pathfinder School, back in our series of woodcraft on a budget. And I've had a lot of guys ask me about the double bit axe. And I wanted to talk a little bit today about 3 examples of double bit axes for budget woodcraft, and the advantages and disadvantages of the double bit axe, and why we even have the double bit axe in our repertoire of woodsman's tools today. And understand that double bit axes have been around since Egyptian time, but they weren't really popular in the US or used very much in the US until the Civil War. The double bit axe has distinct advantages over a single bit axe. So let's talk about that first. All right, so the first axe that we'll talk about when we're talking about advantages of the double bit is we'll talk about this plumb double bit axe. And this was just an axe head that was purchased again from a scrapyard for scrapyard price. I think I paid $2 or $3 for this head. It's about a 2-pound head, somewhere in that neighborhood. It's over 1.5 pounds, I know that, but I'd say it's between 2 and 2.5. I put a normal double bit handle on it and cut about 3 inches off of it so that it would be more comfortable for me to carry, so that it meets the criteria, of an axe that's going to fit my body size. Now, understand that axes like this typically had a handle on them longer than a normal axe. The reason for that was, obviously you could get more leverage into the swing that way with forward momentum of the axe. The advantage of the double bit axe really was that you had 2 sharp edges. So if you were using this axe and you were timbering or logging for a living, and you made your money by cutting wood, you didn't have to take the time with this axe, to sharpen a second edge. You always had another one that you could just flip over and use a sharp edge. A lot of guys, including Nesmith with his small double bit hatchet, went with the theory that one edge could be beveled different than the other edge, and it could be a multifunctional tool for 2 different purposes. If I used a steeper grind on one edge and made that edge profile a little bit thinner, then it would be very sharp and cut deeply into a tree that I was trying to fell. On the other side, I would have a more shallow grind and a beefier blade that I could use for things like roots, knots, burls, and things like that when I was cutting or for limbing. Now, when they built the roads during the Civil War and they were first starting to clear cut to build these roads, a lot of double bit axes were used, and they were used for that purpose. One side was used for anything that was close to the ground, for roots, knots, things like that. The other side was used for actually cutting and clearing trees. So there's a very specific purpose for that double bit design. What we have to remember about the double bit is that all of the advantages of the double bit, unless we're using this thing every single day to make our living, are truly offset by its disadvantages. This is the Condor double bit Michigan axe. Comes with a really nice leather sheath. There's one thing about Condor that's a plus. It's the leather on their knives and their axes. They're definitely top notch. The axe itself comes sharpened with the same bevel on both sides. So if you are using this as an intended everyday use axe, where you're going to have one side that's thinner than the other side for felling and one side is thicker for knots and limbing, then you're going to need to change that profile after you buy the axe. This axe runs about 80 bucks, somewhere in that neighborhood. Now again, I'll say, and I'm sure someone's going to disagree with this, but for me, the normal everyday woodsman who's not making his living with the axe has no business carrying a double bit axe. There's too many dangers that offset the advantages if you're not cutting wood constantly with this axe. One of the names that this axe was saddled with when it first came out in the 1850s was the backstabber, because a lot of loggers carried that axe over their shoulder, and it would be very easily, for that thing to catch you in the back and cut your back, or when it was swung over the top, catch you in the back. And it was also very bad when on the backswing, if you weren't really careful, when you had someone else cutting wood with you, because instead of having a hammer pole going backwards, you now have a sharp blade going backwards. So those are disadvantages of this axe right off the bat. As far as carrying the axe through the woods, you have the same disadvantage. With a hammer pole type axe, you can carry that axe so that the blade is down when you're walking with it. With a double bit, even carrying it sideways, you still have a chance on that blade being exposed if you fall and falling into that blade. Now obviously we're going to put our mask on this thing if we're walking through the woods with it, but it's another disadvantage of the double bit axe if you're just traveling from one tree even to the next and you're not very cognizant of your safety to put your mask back on your axe in between things. So let's talk about another disadvantage of this axe, and that is around camp. Obviously we want to keep our cover on our axe whenever we're not using it, but a lot of times in camp when you're cutting a lot of firewood and things like that, people tend to put their axe in a log to store that axe or leave that axe there for the next person or for the next time they might use it a half an hour from now to cut more wood, or while the rest of you go get a cup of coffee, whatever the case may be. And if you bury this in a stump or a log, instead of having an exposed hammer pole, you have an exposed blade. Okay, so this is a Nesmith style pocket axe, what he called a pocket axe. This one is made by, or is labeled Timberwolf. The marbles is almost exactly the same because I own both of them, and the sheath is almost identical, so I'd say the same company makes them. The sheath is pretty much crap. The axe isn't too bad. For 30 bucks, this isn't a horrible little double bit axe. Again, it's got the same bevel on both sides, so if you want to go with the Nesmith theology of how this axe should be set up, it should be two different bevels, one for finer work and one for things like knots and boning and things of that nature. So you would have to change that. But for 30 bucks, it's not a bad little axe. It's got a nice handle in it, it's got a nice handle shape, very reminiscent to the original that Nesmith talked about in his book Woodcraft and Camping. But again, for my money, the distinct disadvantages that a double bit axe has far outweigh any advantages that it has. And in my opinion, there aren't a lot of advantage to an axe this size, especially to be a double bit axe. I can see the advantage if you are logging or timbering for a living, but you're not going to do that with something like this. So the ability to have two different bevels here, one for finer work and one for more robust work like knots and things like that, doesn't pan out to me enough to give up the hammer pole on one side of a single bit axe or hatchet that I can use for pounding stakes for camps, tarps, traps, and all of those types of things, because I've got a knife on my belt anyway. Big disadvantage to this is a lot of people have tried to pound stakes with this thing from the side with the bit turned in horizontal fashion, and invariably that will snap this handle off. So you never want to pound anything with this axe turned sideways, because that's the thinnest part of the handle that you're putting the stress on when you go this direction, and you'll snap that handle off of there. This way you've got this much of the handle absorbing the shock. This way you've got about 1/3 of that amount of the handle absorbing the shock, and you will eventually break it off. So again, that's another big disadvantage, especially to a double bit hand axe. I would much prefer just a Hudson Bay with a nice hammer pole on it as far as a hatchet goes than any double bit. But everybody's different. Nesmith enjoyed his greatly, and I can't knock his theories or his wisdom because it's been out there for a long period of time. I can only use what works best for me. One thing that you can do if you don't have a block to set something up on top of for splitting is you can lay it diagonally against a stopping block to where your axe is going to hit this block. It's not going to go in the ground. It's not going to go in your leg. So you'd lay this sideways here, spread your legs, and split it so that when your axe comes down, it's going to go in this piece of wood if it goes through this one. Okay, so dollars and cents, woodcraft on a budget. Condor makes a pretty decent tool. You're probably never going to destroy this thing at 80 bucks, and it's brand new. If you're into refurbishment and working on things that are antiques that might need some love, the plumb axe like this one, the head was like $3, the handle was about less than 20, and the mask itself I bought aftermarket for like 20 bucks. So for half the price of the Condor, you could have a made in the USA plumb good antique axe, or you could just buy the Condor for 80. Cheap axe like this one, 30 bucks, would get anybody by for the time being, especially if you just want a nice little pocket axe. But truly my opinion of double bits are that if you're not using them for a living, you really don't have a business carrying them. You're much better off carrying a single blade hammer pull design axe that you can get a lot more usefulness out of, and is much more multifunctional and less dangerous to someone who doesn't use it every day than a double bit axe. I'm Dave Canterbury with the Pathfinder School. I appreciate you guys joining me for this just quick video on the double bit and some of my theories and mentality about the double bit axe, and a little bit of information on a couple writers like Bernard Mason and Cook, who have written really good books on the using of an axe for woodcrafting, as far as the axe itself and the history of the axe. I appreciate your views. I appreciate your support. I thank you for everything you do for me, for my school, for my family, all my instructors, sponsors, affiliates, and friends. And I'll be back with another video as soon as I can. Thanks, guys.